we're living in a world where practically anything goes. People can do whatever, and you're kind of encouraged to just be yourself and do whatever you want to do with no real regard for what's right and what's wrong. And the sad part about that is that the consequences for sin has not changed. God's requirements of righteousness and obedience to Him is still the same. So when we encourage people to just do anything and don't really stress how important it is to obey God, we are literally ruining people's lives. And as the church or as the ministry or as people of God, sometimes we don't really want to talk about the consequences of sin and how God hates sin. And we talk about the blessings, which is great. There are some wonderful benefits to righteousness. But when we allow people to disobey God, they forfeit those benefits and all of those things. And that's what we're going to see today in our lesson. And the main thing that I got out of this lesson is that God expects us to obey Him. And if we don't obey Him, there are consequences. And I teach all the time, you want to choose actions that have benefits, not consequences, because the consequences of disobeying God, they are not something that we want to deal with. And we know that the wages of sin is death, and that Jesus is coming back and there will be eternal damnation and burning and all of that. But what this lesson today is teaching us is that there are consequences of sin that we must endure right here on earth. And that the choices that we make, whether we're going to obey God or whether we're not going to obey God, directly impacts the quality of life that we live on earth. And that's something that is so important to understand. So, again, before we do anything, and I think I said this last week, don't do anything that you cannot ask God to bless, because we do not want to live with the consequences of disobeying God. Thank you so much for joining me for the Sanctuary Sunday School, and I am so glad to have you here. Once again, I do have a free ebook. It's a gift for you, just to thank you for being with me over this past year. It is available. It's only free for one more day. So go to the website, www.thesanctuary.academy, and get your free ebook. And while you're there, go ahead and leave a review and let me know what you think of the book. Share it with your friends. Go ahead and recommend it to somebody else. This week's subject now, just to make sure that nobody gets confused, I am teaching from the Union Gospel Press book. This time, and this lesson is Dreadful Consequences, and you can find this lesson in the book of Genesis in the 3rd chapter. If you are studying from the other book, the Sunday School Commentary, then I did that lesson as well, and just look for that one. That subject is about Abram, the call of Abram. So there are two separate lessons. This one today that I'm doing in this video is Dreadful Consequences. So now we're back here in the Garden of Eden, and we're talking about the consequences of sin and Adam's disobedience to God. And he started with the serpent, and he cursed the serpent. Now, I don't know about you, but I do not like snakes. So when he talks about what he did with serpents, and he said that this serpent was cursed above all of the animals in creation, all of the cattle, all of the beasts of the field. You're going to be one of the most hated animals that there is. And he said he was going to place enmity, okay, between woman and between snakes. So enmity is a relationship of hatred between two enemies. And that is very accurate, because that is about how I feel about snakes. I can't even stand to look at them. So God placed enmity between woman and the snake and her seed. So now what that means is, the seed of woman is not just women. The seed of woman is everybody, because everybody was born of a woman after Eve was created from Adam. So now this is everybody. He placed this hatred and this relationship between the serpent and humanity, where they would not get along. And it says that we would crush his head and he would bruise our heels, and there would just be a thing where snakes attack humans and humans try to kill snakes. So this is what he did to them to ruin this relationship that Eve had with this serpent. And then he said for the woman, he would bring sorrow at conception and that we would give birth in extreme pain. And those of you who are out there who are mothers, you know what this pain is like. And that is all part of the curse. And then another part of the curse is said that the husband would have rule over you. Now again, we're studying this from the human perspective. So we really don't know what God's plan was initially. All we know is what we've lived with after the creation and what happened after God cursed them. So we don't know what it would have been like with man and woman. But it says here that the husband would have rule over you. And as you can see, to this very day, there is a struggle between men and women. There's all of these battles about women's rights and treating women fairly. And all of that dates right back to this garden. And it all came about as a result of this curse. And then he addressed man, Adam. And the thing about mankind is that, or the male, is that God gave this charge to Adam. So when Eve ate the fruit, that was one thing. But when Adam ate the fruit, that took things to a whole different level. And so God had to punish them for that. And so with Adam, he told him that he was going to curse the ground because of you. So Eve's curse was directed to her. You know, you're gonna give birth in pain, and your husband gonna have rule over you. Her curse was about her. But Adam's curse applied to the entire world. I'm cursing the ground. Okay? So that now you're not going to be able, he had an assignment to till the ground, but now it's going to be hard to till this ground. There's going to be thorns. There's going to be thistles. It's going to be work. And then in order for you to earn a living, you got to earn it by the sweat off your face. You got to work hard. And not only that, it says you're going to work hard until you die, until you go back to the dust that I created you from. And this was this curse right here changed the quality of human lifestyle. It changed the existence. So after Adam and Eve, no other human has experienced what it's like to live in Eden, to live in paradise. Since that time, from that time to this, every single human being, I don't care how successful you may be or how rich or famous you may be, every single human being has experienced some level of pain, some level of hardship, something, even if it's something like if it's death in the family or if it's monetary problems or if it's your own sickness, every single human being suffers because of this curse that God placed on Adam because of his disobedience. And then the next part of this, though, is where I kind of gained a lot of respect for Adam because he kind of just moved on. He accepted it. And in last week's lesson, I was saying it was a bit disappointing. You know, every time I read that, how when God asked him, did you eat of the tree? He goes, well, that woman, he instantly did not accept accountability and blamed her. But we see a change in this lesson because when God gave him the consequences, Adam did take his consequences like a man. And that's something that I could respect because the first thing he did was he named Eve, which indicates that he understood that life was going to go on because prior to this, he was calling her woman. Okay. And this time in this lesson, now he named her. He named her Eve. And it means the mother of all living. Eve means living. So Adam knew that life was going to go on and that they were going to reproduce and that he was going to take care of this world and that he was going to establish the world. So it was kind of like he said, okay, yes, Lord, I messed up. I blew this paradise thing, but I'm going to make this work with what I have. I'm going to live in spite of the consequences. And that is a very powerful lesson for us. And this is something that I teach to my daughter all the time. When you do something and there are consequences, the way that you respond to your consequences, they can either perpetuate that consequence or they can set you up so that you can move on and improve and live better after the consequence. And so that's why I like the way that Adam did this. He said, okay, I'm going to have to work hard. I'm going to have to sweat. You're going to have to bear children in labor and in pain. So we're going to do this and we're going to move on and we're going to still live as well as we possibly can, giving the consequences that we have created and established for ourselves and the entire world. And then once they did that, God provided them with clothing and what they needed because they had to leave the garden. It was time for them to leave Eden. So when they were there in the garden, it was paradise. Everything was perfect. Everything was easy. Everything was laid out. All they had to do was just live in bliss. So now you've blown that. Now you got to leave the garden. So I'm going to give you some clothes and I'm going to send you out there. You're going to work that land and you're going to be all right. And this is what happened. And it says that God put the angels there, the cherubs there with the flaming swords that twirled in the way so that you can't get out. I don't know if you've ever taken public transportation, but the way that the turnstiles work, you can go out, but you cannot get back in through that same turnstile. And so God set them out. They could not get back into that garden, and the paradise as they knew it was over. And this was a dreadful consequence. And I'm sure that that was difficult. And those were some dark days. And as human beings, I'm sure we've all had those moments where we were like, oh my God, I blew it. Why did I do that? You know, you kicking yourself. And it's like, oh my God, if I had just, and now I got to do this. And as human beings, that is part of it. All of that came from Adam and Eve in the garden. But that's okay. Because as we see, they still lived and they still got it done. Because if Adam and Eve hadn't decided, okay, we're going to pick up, we're going to go on, we're going to move on, I wouldn't be here today. You wouldn't be here today. The world wouldn't be here today. The world is still here. The world is still going because God created it to be that way. We're still here and we still have a job to do. Now we have this Bible and we see clearly the consequences of disobeying God. So what we want to do is obey God and to do what God says. And we want to walk in the blessings of God. And we want to live our lives in a way where we do not have to deal with the dreadful consequences of disobeying God.